From hinting that John's time in the main series might be over, to revealing his top choices for who should continue John's legacy, here's what director Chad Stahelski recently teased about Keanu Reeves' return in John Wick 5. And I'm starting with the bad news. It might be time to say goodbye to our dear friend John Wick. But it gets better, trust me. Now, if you somehow still haven't watched Chapter 4, then here's a major spoiler for you. Throughout this video, I'll be talking about how the latest movie ends and the possible storylines that can still continue into the future. And I'll need to get down to the gritty details in order to make my case. So yeah, here's your chance to plug your ears. But now, let's get into the meat of things. Is John's journey through the Wickverse over? Well, it seems so. In an interview with Screen Rant, Chad revealed that Lionsgate actually tried getting a 5th chapter greenlit. I mean, of course they'd want to keep the hype train going, because have you seen the reviews for Chapter 4? People are obsessed with how it raised the stakes from the previous chapter. It went above and beyond most action movies in the last decade, and proved that an action film directed by stuntmen can be one of the most thrilling experiences you could ever have in the cinema. I'd say the only film series that comes close to John Wick in terms of action choreography is Donnie Yen's Ip Man franchise. So why haven't you heard that Keanu's starting his 6-month-long training for Chapter 5? Well, it's because Chad turned down the opportunity to film Chapters 4 and 5 together. Yup, originally, Lionsgate and Chad wanted to shoot 2 chapters simultaneously, because it ends up saving the studio a lot of money. But Chad declined the offer for a very simple reason. He didn't know how he'd film 2 projects back to back, and make sure that both of them were of the same quality that fans expect. You see, here's how Chad's process works for the John Wick films. He makes a movie, then takes about 2 years off to get better at directing an action movie after that. How can he bring more life into the franchise? How can he build the world in a way that makes sense for the characters? And that's why each chapter gets progressively more complex. The series just got better in terms of cinematography, action choreography, and set design when Chad took 2 years off. Just look at the difference between Chapters 2 and 3. If Chapter 2 was high-octane action, then Chapter 3 was high-octane action mixed with rocket fuel. And Chapter 4 came along 4 years later, and he mixed a bag of C4 in there and ignited the whole thing. Anyway, it's safe to say that we're not getting a John Wick movie for at least 2 years. If it even happens, that is. Chad's completely open to the idea of a 5th movie, but I think it's going to be a hard sell for the audience. Because where do you go now that John's, well, dead? I did promise you it gets better, didn't I? Let's look at the ending real quick and really try to break it down. Winston and the Bowery King were standing at John's funeral, and they brought his dog along too. It makes sense to have the dog there to say goodbye to John one last time. But is it really goodbye? Winston and Bowery's dialogue is vague enough that it suggests that Baba Yaga might not actually be gone. And if you noticed, the dog looks away from his grave too. He looks at a point somewhere off screen, which might be a hint that John was somewhere far away and looking over at his 2 greatest allies. Am I reading too much into it? Maybe. Although, wouldn't it be great if we found out that Kane helped John fake his death, and in return, John gave him a marker? It makes sense for the characters and the world they live in, and Kane could cash it in on Chapter 5. But again, that's just a theory. Let's stick with the facts and figure out where Chapter 5 could realistically go next. Since John's finally free from the High Table's grip, I think it's time to focus on the 3 most compelling characters in the series so far: Kane, Mr. Nobody, and Akira. If you've stayed for the post-credits scene, then you'll remember that Akira will set out to find Kane and avenge her father's death. Of course, she doesn't know that his daughter's life was held hostage by the High Table until Kane did what he was ordered to do. So yeah, there's plenty of room for a sequel. It just might not have Keanu Reeves in it, which is sad, I know, since we're all used to him pulling off the most insane action sequences anyone's seen in recent memory. But hey, if the series has proved anything so far, it's that the Wickverse is a lot bigger than John himself. Kane, Mr. Nobody, and Akira weren't as fleshed out as I'd wanted them to be, but that's the whole point. They deserve their own storyline in a sequel that pays homage to John's legacy. Now, assuming that Chad's taking a break for 2 years, what can we expect moving forward? Well, in a recent interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Chad hinted that he and Keanu will travel to Japan and sit at their favorite spot to discuss the future. And if they decide that there's one crazy idea that they want to try, then you can be sure Lionsgate will jump on that opportunity and greenlight a 5th movie. In fact, Lionsgate Motion Picture Group's chair, Joe Drake, told The Hollywood Reporter in a separate interview that they're completely open and willing to do a 5th, and they'd be fools not to go for it. As of this video, Chapter 4 has grossed $350 million. You don't say no to box office dominance like that, do you?
Ready, and action!
Anyway, in an era of prequels, spin-offs, and remakes, a 5th chapter doesn't sound bad at all. But what if you want Keanu back in the franchise in a way that makes sense? Keep in mind, though, that the actor is pushing 60. He might be one of the fittest, hardest working actors in Hollywood right now, but he's no spring chicken. All that training, grappling, and stunt work is hard on the joints, and Chapter 4 has been the most demanding physical role he's ever played in his career. So I'll say he's earned a well-deserved rest. But what if Chad and Keanu had already scheduled Chapter 5? What if a younger actor takes on the mantle of Baba Yaga in his absolute prime, while Keanu Reeves narrates? That to me sounds like a really cool idea. Plus, he'd be forced to speak more lines than he did in the latest movie. Seriously, just 380 words in the entire runtime. Anyway, Chad has a few dream actors that he'd love to cast in John Wick Chapter 5 if it ever comes to fruition. In an exclusive interview with The Direct, Chad revealed that he has a huge list of actors he'd love to work with on John Wick 5 or even a spin-off movie, and his top 3 choices are Michelle Yeoh, Cillian Murphy, and, you guessed it, Robert Downey Jr. Chad's a big Peaky Blinders nerd, so of course he'd want Cillian playing a key role in the Wickverse. Maybe someone wicked and evil sits at the high table? I think Robert Downey would be fantastic as an eccentric high table villain, and he could serve as the series' principal antagonist. It's just an idea, but I think it's a winner. But that's not all. Chad also has Charlize Theron and Colin Farrell in mind for John Wick. We've all seen her work on Atomic Blonde, and that serves as her audition reel for any action movie she picks moving forward. She was just too badass there. Colin, on the other hand, is an acting powerhouse who would be perfect for a villainous role in the series. So, from Chad's top A-list picks for a John Wick sequel to revealing that John's time in the sun has finally come to an end, those were the director's plans for John Wick's future.